All right. Good morning. Welcome to the National Book Critics Circle Superstars of Fiction program. I'm Jane Ciabattari, co-VP of Events and 50th Anniversary co-chair for the National Book Critics Circle. I'm your moderator today. This is that moment when I tell you to turn your cell phones down. Okay. I want to thank the Bay Area Book Festival for hosting us. I want to thank Sherilyn Parsons. A shout out to Sherilyn in Paris. And I want to thank Brooke and Aya and all the other board members who've kept this beautiful book festival going to help us celebrate books here in their 10th year in Berkeley. Thanks you all for coming. Thanks to Amy Tan and Jonathan Lethem for joining us, our superstars, to celebrate this wonderful 50th anniversary. I'm going to begin with a land acknowledgement, which I find moving because my own roots go back to the Lenape, who are on the east coast of this country. And the acknowledgement says, we acknowledge we are gathering on the unceded ancestral lands of the Chokenyo-speaking people known as Wuchin. We are committed to living our values by promoting the history of these people, recognizing that they are still here as vital members of our community, and creating a space where all literary voices are celebrated and all stories are honored. I always find that moving because I think how many generations are back and all the hundreds of tribes that once inhabited this continent. I want to mention that there will be a book signing. Thank you to Green Apple Books. Anyway, we're very excited to have two of these superstars of fiction with us today. Alas, Tommy Orange can't be here. He has come down with an unfortunate bug that kept him up all night, so we send him best wishes. He won't be able to appear later today at 2 o'clock as well. So we send him best wishes for a speedy recovery. I want to give you a little bit of history about the National Book Critics Circle. It was founded in 1974 at the Algonquin Round Table in New York as a way of extending the Algonquin conversation to the rest of the country. As we celebrate our 50th anniversary, we remember the value of our mission to honor outstanding writing, foster a national conversation about reading, criticism, and literature. I like to think of us as what Toni Morrison said when she got our Lifetime Achievement Award, a wild faculty of sorts. We've kept going for 50 years as a teensy nonprofit with no office, no address, no staff, no budget really, and we're all run on a 24-member volunteer board. You can read more about that at our bookcritics.org. I will say that the NBC's critics have from the beginning carried the cachet of being judged by the critics themselves. Unlike other literary prizes, they aren't judged solely based on paid publisher submissions or judged by a rotating panel of a few. Choosing the honored books takes a full year. 24 board members reading beginning in March. It's a confidential process. We are required to divulge conflicts of interest, and each year we read thousands of books in 6 categories: autobiography, biography, criticism, fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. In December, the committee will vote on long lists. In January, we whittle it down to short lists. And in March, we announce our winners. And in 2025, the March Award ceremony will be March 20th at the New School in New York. You know, it's an exciting job. We work really hard. But we also are aware we're sort of have the capability of creating literary reputations. So it's a kind of thing we take seriously. I mean, we really mull over, we love discovering new voices. We like honoring the really brilliant language and structure and so forth. It's just one of those things that book nerds have a great time. Anyway, as I'm talking today and introducing our folks, I'm going to highlight some of the words of our National Book Critic Award-winning members in their reviews, because I think that's another thing that we may be able to honor today. Because book reviewing is really important. How are you to decide what you're going to read? And how do people decide to read these books by these authors? Back when, and the books I'm talking about today, the three are published in 1989, 1999, and Tommy Orange's book was published in 2019 was his award. So we have a range of times. I want to introduce our two superstars here. Jonathan Lethem's NBCC Award fiction was for Motherless Brooklyn, published in October 1999. It's a reinvented neo-noir detective novel with a narrator with Tourette's syndrome, whose Joycean riffs are one of the many joys of the novel. Publishers Weekly called Motherless Brooklyn a brilliantly imagined riff on the collective classic detective tale, narrated in a unique voice by its embattled protagonist, Brooklynite and orphan Lionel Esrog, aka Freak Show. Our Balakian Award-winning critic Albert Morbillo in the New York Times wrote, "Under the guise of a detective novel, Lethem has written a more piercing tale of investigation, one revealing how the mind drives on its own wheels within wheels." I'll mention Tommy Orange's book, it's There. It was a winner of the John Leonard Award for Best First Book. Maureen Corrigan, who's an NBCC award-winning critic for NPR, wrote, "This is a novel about urban Indians, about native people who know, as he says, the sound of the freeway better than they do rivers." Maureen called this book pithy and pointed, with a literary authority rare in a debut novel. So these are those reviews that were coming out at the time the book was published. Amy Tan's The Joy Luck Club, published in March 1989, was a finalist for the NBCC Award in Fiction that year. In a Publishers Weekly interview, NBCC member Gail Feldman writes, "Joy, luck, and magic are words used often to describe the publishing history of the Joy Luck Club. In these days of brand name authors and mega hype, all three elements were required to catapult a first book about 4 Chinese women and their American daughters to a sustained presence on bestseller lists and to attract a reprint price in excess of $1.2 million. The New York Times review by Orville Schell called this book a jewel of a book. So I'm wondering, now that I can ask some questions and get off my talking, I'm not here to talk, I just want to tell you about the NBCC. I'd like each of you, please, to describe what it was like when you learned you'd been named an NBCC finalist and or won the award. I mean, what did it feel like? What was your notification? Jonathan?
You want me to go first? Yeah. Well, I mean, so I got to be there, and I don't know if it's still structured this way, but as I was explained that day, they were deciding sort of in the hours just before, so there was no question. There are some things where they really want you, the winner, to show up to take the award, so they sneak word to them weeks in advance, and then they swear them to secrecy. This isn't possible because they haven't chosen them. So if you wanted to stand the chance of accepting it in person, you had to go there and risk losing it in person. So, I mean, but to set the context, this was my, it was a transformational moment for me in every way. I'd had 4 previous novels in a short story collection, and I was the very definition of a cult author. There was a few people who'd found my work, and I was very excited to be in conversation with them, and I'd had public events. I knew what it was like to play the role of the author, but I had not risen through the visibility layer to where, you know, reviewers, the Motherless Brooklyn was the first of my novels to be reviewed in the New York Times, for example. And I didn't even really feel irate about that. I was just like, yeah, of course, because my heroes were mostly sort of marginal writers at that time, I was obsessed with Philip K. Dick and Charles Willeford and Jim Thompson and Patricia Highsmith, people who kind of had this career, this dark horse aura, where they were sometimes published marginally or in paperback originals, and I identified with this. Well, that was over all at once for me when so I went to this auditorium. It was at the New School, and I'd been nominated, which itself just seemed completely dreamlike. I really couldn't believe it, but I was living in New York at the time, so it was very easy for me to participate. There was also a reading the night before, which was a sweet moment. The whole thing seemed already magical to me. And I definitely had a kind of out-of-body moment when the book's name was called, and I went up and took the thing, and then I remember walking for a little celebratory drink with like 5 or 6 people across Washington Square Park towards some bar. Somebody picked out a destination. I was probably insensate and couldn't even really
And you were in Manhattan.
navigate. Yeah, it was,
You were in Manhattan,
yeah.
not Brooklyn.
Not in Brooklyn, no. No, it was at the New School Auditorium.
Right, I know.
And but I remember I had barely gotten a cell phone at that time. It was brand new for me. It was a little flip phone. And but I called my dad and I told him, and it was like, just this really basic transformational moment. And it also messed with me in a huge way because it created all these incredible opportunities, but my self-conception was lagging behind the opportunities. I still thought I was a dark horse. And I tried to keep occupying this role of the little engine that could, the exiled, the marginal, stigmatic kind of identity, like my heroes. And I realized I was now kind of, in good and bad ways, mostly good, but I had to work with them. I was kind of on the main stage instantly. And the next thing I wrote was The Fortress of Solitude, and unfortunately, I'd already started and conceived this next book about Brooklyn, so it fit the profile of what people who'd gotten excited about Motherless Brooklyn kind of wanted, and that book was, it gave me the assurance in a way to write a much bigger kind of story and a more personal kind of story.
Well, I was going to mention or ask you, wasn't Motherless Brooklyn the first book you wrote about New York and Brooklyn?
Yes, it was also a conversion because I'd been living in the Bay Area. My first 4 novels were set in a variety. Gun with Occasional Music was set in Oakland and never mentioned San Francisco. That was my big gimmick. It was as if it didn't exist. Amnesia Moon was kind of set in the desert, and then it comes to the Bay Area and so on. I'd mostly written about the West. I actually touched Brooklyn very, very briefly in Girl in Landscape, the book that preceded Brooklyn crime novel. But the family lives in Brooklyn just in the first chapter, and then they emigrate to Mars. So no one remembers that Brooklyn is in that book, which makes sense. So in a real sense, I was suddenly claiming my childhood turf, and I moved back there, and I was writing about it with this new kind of engagement, writing about real places more than imaginary places. Because my earlier books, even if they were set in the West or in the Bay Area, they were all had kind of imaginative transformations and a sort of rubbery reality to them. And when I started writing about Brooklyn, I sank my claws into the streets, and that has become, what people expect from me. Even though I go on writing all sorts of other kinds of books, people think I'm doing my real work when I write about Brooklyn now. So that's what I'm supposed to do. So the award became, really the signature of who I was going to be, and it's.
Did that have drawbacks?
Well, I knew I wanted to do lots of other kinds of things too, and so it created a dynamic that I've learned to embrace, which is, I go, in a way, when I write about places other than Brooklyn, I go back to being that dark horse a little bit. I'm sort of off the main path. I'm like Neil Young in the '80s, doing like those albums of electronics and stuff, and people are like tapping their watch, waiting for it to start making Neil Young sounds again. So I'm that guy. I have like a thing I'm supposed to do and a thing I do instead sometimes. It's okay. The bifurcation is actually really rich for me now that I've figured out how to play with it. Sometimes I'm a science fiction author. Sometimes I'm a crime writer. Sometimes I
Or
write.
desert.
I write about the desert, and I write also a lot of essays about music and film and stuff. And then every now and then I put out a big serious book about New York City again.
As in Brooklyn crime novel, which we'll get to in a while. Amy, I think about your early work. I just spoke with Maya, who said to me on the way over here that she read the Joy Luck Club in middle school. It made her want to be a writer. I mean, this is a book that has had such an impact on the world in so many ways. And I'm wondering for you, what it was like when you realized that you were publishing a book that was getting major reviews, major sales, people all around the country reading and responding to it, and then it becomes a finalist for a national literary award like the NBCC award.
There's a theme in my life that I realize looking back has been there since the beginning, and that is that everything is unexpected. I think because of the way that I grew up, that I had a father and a brother who died the same year, and hoping against hope, the miracle did not happen, that I had learned to taper my hopes down to almost nothing. And when I was writing this book, in the beginning, it was my first book, it was this collection of short stories. I was still at a writer's workshop and still doing these stories there. So that was unexpected to get an offer.
What were you doing before?
It was a business writer. I was not a tech writer. I was a business writer for tech companies like IBM and AT&T. And my specialty was rah-rah letters of marketing and sales for employees in telecommunications. Total propaganda.
What drew you to tell these stories in the Joy Luck Club?
I was working 90 billable hours a week, and it wasn't a life, and somebody said that I had workaholism and that I needed to go to therapy. The therapist fell asleep 3 times, so I thought I should do my own therapy by like jazz piano or writing fiction. I had been an English major, but had not been reading actively for quite a while. So I started by asking a number of people who did write, among them the wonderful Amy Hempel, who was a friend of a friend, and got reading lists and started writing and getting this, feedback that was great. Everything I got, I wasn't sensitive to, oh, it's terrible. People were very encouraging, and critical things. But everything was a surprise, and getting an agent was a surprise. She came to me. It started feeling like I had ghosts or something that were whispering into these people's ears. The other thought that I had is that I was dead and that I was dreaming this. I mean, I'm serious. This was so spooky to me. And then I got a publisher, and I picked Faith Sale, and she was with Putnam, so that's how I came to be there. The original print run would be like a typical first novel, but this was short stories, 5,000. And then secretly they raised it a little bit as these things started happening. They raised it, I think, at last count it was 16 or 17,000 for a first print run. And then they reprinted week after week. It was unreal. By time, let me just say that Faith was very wise, and she said, don't get into this whole scene of parties, even though she was the ultimate party girl. Don't do this, don't let it get to your head, don't, and the dangers. And of course, I was the girl who had learned to don't expect anything, it's all going to come crashing down, the reviews will be horrible, people will eviscerate you because you're the first Asian American in a long time to have a book, and they'll say it's all stereotypes, or, I was prepared for the negative. And so when it got on the bestseller list, I thought, well, this is a fluke. It's going to fall off, and in 6 weeks, you won't even see it on the shelves. I cried on publication date, not out of joy, but out of fear that it had gone out of control My life was out of control. I was happy with my marriage, where I lived, everything. And so there was nothing I really dreamt of changing. By the time I got the NBCC nomination, finalist, I was nominated and then became a finalist. It was just another level of, oh my God, this is, because I recognized that they were the reviewers, and I had mostly good reviews and some stinkers. Of course, you always remember the stinkers more than the good ones. Like, why did Amy Tan, her life was interesting enough to write about? And I want to say, it's not memoir, it's fiction. Anyway, those were the one that said Shogun and, I don't know, Shogun was better, it's been done before. You remember those. I remember some of the particular ones, but I also remember my editor saying, it's not going to happen because you're on the bestseller list. Don't get your hopes up. So Faith was kind of like me, like dampened down any kind of hope. So by the time things were announced, it was not like I was, saying this is going to happen. Some of the reasons why I got nominated, it was like, oh, because I'm Asian American, I'm the token, there. So it was constantly saying, it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. And so when the things happened, I really was taken aback. I did not believe, and she said, if it doesn't fall off the bestseller list, you won't get any prizes whatsoever. It was all this stuff that was very confusing. Now, one thing I don't remember, Jonathan was saying there was a ceremony. Was there a ceremony that I was supposed to? Was I there?
I want to clarify, nominations are not, we announced the finalists. So the finalists have been through a year of critical reading by 24 critics. So to be a finalist is a remarkable accomplishment. And there's a reading by the finalists, and then the next night, usually, the awards are voted on during the day, and they announce the one who came out on top.
Where was this? No, I'm going to tell you why, but where was this ceremony?
It's before my time, but I think it was at NYU. I think it was.
No, I don't. Here's the reason why I possibly don't remember the ceremony, is that I was so booked on book tour, month after month, I had no time off. And I remember being such a good girl that when I got nominated, not only when I got nominated or finalist, when I got the award for something, Commonwealth, I didn't go because I had a bookstore reading. And that's how seriously I took my commitments. Today I think I would ask the bookstore if I could possibly reschedule. But so if there was something, that probably is the reason why I wasn't there. Didn't expect it to happen and had a commitment to be somewhere, like probably in Europe or something. I don't recall. I don't recall a lot of it. It was such a fog, and I just kept trying to push it out of my mind because I didn't want it to change me. And the expectations were frightening for the second book. It was, now they've given me this recognition. What did they really see in this? What do I have to do again for the second book? And then I had people telling me, writers saying to me, well, you may have gotten these great reviews, but they always hate the second book. And you'll be eviscerated, so write it fast, get it over with. I'm not kidding. I'm not going to tell you the two people who told me that. I mean, one said, you're going to be like those people at the circus. You're sitting above a big barrel of water and they're throwing things at you, and then you're going to be dumped. And that's what's going to happen. So it didn't come with a lot of happiness that this is going to lead to great things. It was the expectations. My life has been filled with lack of expectation, and then, the unexpected, and then the bad expectation. So that's me. But I'm a happy person. No, I don't get disappointed, you know? If it happens, it's like, wow, I guess I must be dead and I'm dreaming this. So, and then I'm alive, so it's great.
Do you want to read first? Because I'm going to ask you a question about that. Did you have any expectation when that first book was in the world that you might write and illustrate a memoir about birding?
No, not at all. No.
Never.
First of all, I knew nothing about birds, and I didn't draw. So, you know, again, unexpected. And I didn't do what's in this latest book because I thought I should do a published book about it. It was a private journal, and it was my editor, Dan Halpern, who said, "How's that novel going?" And I said, you know, I'm really distracted, birds. And then he later said, "Why don't we publish your journal?" And I said, no, it's really silly. It's, you know, messy, cartoons, you know. And he said, no, I think that's what we wanted. I think, you know, and I had my excuses for why he wanted that. Save his job, you know, blah, blah, blah. Just a little placeholder. Yeah, so that was unexpected.
Let me let you get your page opened, and I will read you a little quick LitHub moment. If you promise me a witty birder book, this is a review from LitHub, a book to look forward to in 2024. If you promise me a witty birder book, birds as windows on life, then great. And if the great Amy Tan is writing it, even better. The perfect antidote with illustrations to whatever these past few years have been. So will you read to us from your beautiful book?
Trying to find one that kind of captures. There are pictures in here. They're kind of like cartoons. What you'd also see in the book is my gradual development as somebody who draws. I still have a hard time using the word artist because they're mostly representations only of particular things. So this is December 23rd, 2018. And I always promise from the Backyard Chronicles when I was doing my personal journal, it put down breaking news, you know. Breaking news from Backyard Bird Chronicles. At 2 p.m., I saw large flocks of crows flying over the patio from different directions. There were about 10 to 20 in each cawing cloud. They took refuge in the oak trees nearest the patio. Others landed on our green roof where they scanned the sky and screamed. A few dug up and ate the caches of food on the roof that the scrub jays and squirrels had hidden. The songbirds dispersed when the crows flew nearby. Later, most of the little birds returned and remained at the feeder on the patio. They must have concluded the crows were not interested in their food and were not a threat. But the crows remained alarmed about something. I guessed the reason. Some terrible person had murdered a crow in broad daylight. This is crime scene, a murder of crow. Okay, I admit I placed the dummy crow hanging upside down on the rail next to the patio. Our yard was becoming a crow hangout, which scared the other birds. They were making a mess, knocking the feeders every which way to shake out seeds. I bought the dummy crow from the bird store. It was a little small for a crow, but it was well proportioned and covered in black chicken feathers, some of which were askew, giving the impression that a mighty battle had taken place before the valiant crow succumbed to the murderous human. Crows are smart, so I was impressed that a $14 fake crow had so easily fooled them. I wondered if the crows were mourning their fallen member, given so many had flown in from all directions to join the mourning or lynch mob. The frank crow must have resembled a much-loved muckety-muck member of the tribe. Would they mourn a crow they didn't know? Humans do. I have, for the victims of 9/11, for children shot in schools, for fictional characters no less real than a fake crow.
Thank you, Amy. I have a Crow world around me in Sonoma County, so I can relate to that. I'm so excited to have Jonathan Lethem read it again from Brooklyn Crime Novel, because it's one of my favorite books of the last several years, and I love hearing him read it. But while he prepares to read his section, I'm going to read a quote from The Nation about this book, which I like a lot. It says, Brooklyn crime novel's subtle brilliance, this is from the review, right, lies in Lethem's decision in the tradition of an Italo Calvino or Gilbert Sorrentino to blast away the ligatures that would bind a conventional linear novel. With an untamed metafictional narrator, Lethem is able to interrogate the brutal truths of gentrification and what it means to have found success as a writer emerging at such a pivot point in history. So will you read?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So fun to be here. Okay, here goes. This is from a chapter called Shoplifting as Skill Acquisition. The thing about shoplifting, boosting, is that there's barely one kid who doesn't. Boy, girl, black, white, Puerto Rican, doesn't matter, it comes with the territory. Even the incompetent ones, the one-timers, they feel differently afterward. Whole areas inside them exfoliate, stir into activity. The first day they go into a store with criminal intent, that's the day they've gotten separation, the day they've achieved liftoff. Because this is a criminal world. You wouldn't want to be on just one end of it, would you? Always the victim, never the perp. Recipient of the memo, taker of the call, unable to shout back? No. Shoplifting is skill acquisition. You might need it for later, a basic life art. Best to get these things under your belt. It might pretty much always begin with candy. At a candy store or bodega, pity the bodegas. What chance did they have needing to guard a glass-fronted soda case in the rear, itself wedged behind narrow, loaded aisles, while also keeping your eye on the candy bars stacked right there at the register, far too near the door? Does snatch and run count? Of course it does. Hell, even stealing coins from your parents' dressing table in order to purchase candy counts as a kind of stealing. It makes a start, at least. Not everyone is ready for stealing from strangers. Some need to practice on a parent or sibling. Fulton, Flatbush, Smith Street, Vanderbilt Avenue, Hooper's store on Sesame Street, whatever. You steal because it's there. Candy, soda, comic books, baseball cards, cigarettes, beer, tampons, rubbers, horny goat weed, even before you knew what any of that stuff was for. Girls make the shift to lipstick and eyeliner and legs sheer energy pretty naturally. How many people remember legs? Very easy to shoplift. 2 or 3 black girls and 1 white girl, that's a team to confound Sherlock Holmes. Send them into Fort Knox, they'll emerge with the gold. Smartasses steal pieces of the city from itself. Pry hubcaps off cars on a shady street, not because there's some resale destination, but just to put in your room so your parents do a double take. Advertising from the subway easily popped out of its frame. Whole subway cars full of riders just shaking their heads at you, but what are they going to do? Protect a subway advertisement? All of this goes without saying. It's taken for granted. You do it in pairs, usually. Pairs at least. A good example, that box of Charleston Chews, right there. The largest candy bar known to our human species. Charleston Chews, truthfully, are like eating dried turds that threaten to pull out each and every one of your fillings. Yet here they are, too easily sleeved to ignore, begging for it. Reveal one of these, secreted in your sleeve a few steps from the door of the bodega. It's like a magic trick. Now, too bad, you have to eat it. No, really, I insist, I stole it for you. No one ever finished a Charleston Chew. It's technically impossible. After candy, boosting continues its association with things you'd never eat in your own house. Appetites to make parents weep. One white kid, for instance, develops an addiction to cans of Chef Boyardee ravioli and meat sauce, easily palmed into his winter parka. He pillages these from the corner bodega, where who on earth would ever suspect him? He's white, plus nowhere near the candy or soda. At home, he wolfs the ravioli with a fork straight from the can, then takes the evidence straight to the garbage cans in his front yard. For some, boosting may become an enterprise, a ladder into other types of theft. For the graffiti writers, it's a credibility issue. Pearl paints on Canal Street, that's where the good stuff hides. The war with a shop like that is as much a dimension of the graffiti culture as knowing who the king of the A train is, or the right way to hold a can of Krylon to make a non-drippy period on an exclamation mark. In pursuit of such higher targets, you might become an innovator of some device or gimmick, like the structured backpack, appearing full but actually cavernously empty, or extra pockets sewn into a coat lining, or elaborate methodologies of distraction, such as having a friend telephone and report an intruder on the roof of the store or the back entrance in order to pull an avid security guard off the floor. Hell, who knows? At this rate, you might someday be drawn into a real crime story. You might rob a bank. Before you boost at least a little something, you might not even really qualify as being from Brooklyn. You're just waiting around to see and getting robbed in the meanwhile. You might have chosen to pay for that candy after all if a kid hadn't relieved you of your dollar a block earlier. Or maybe you've got the dollar secured in your sock, in which case it isn't really advisable to drag it out and wave it around. Everything points in the same inevitable direction. So, just grab it. He can't see you from here. I'll meet you outside.
Can't help but be a little proud of the National Book Critics Circle critics who selected the early work of these two. And look how amazing they are. It's really exciting. I think book critics count. I gotta ask, I'm gonna start with you because we're kind of doing an interesting back and forth. Jonathan, what are you working on now or next, or how many?
Yeah. Well, how many is a good question. I'm doing a couple of things concurrently right now. I'm about to present a book, which is a really eccentric one for me. Maybe kind of like Amy's bird book in being so different. Certainly something I never imagined I was going to do back, when me and this award first met up. It's a book of my writings about visual art, and lavishly illustrated, as they say, brought out by a very cool kind of boutique press called Z Books. And I'll have finished copies in like a week, and I'm very excited about that.
And you have some family connection to painting and art?
Well, yeah, I grew up in a painter's home. My dad was and is, at 91, still making paintings all the time. He's indomitable. And I was sort of heading that way. I went to the High School of Music and Art in New York City, thinking I was going to be a painter or a sculptor. Somebody out there said, a fellow alum. It's known as LaGuardia now, and has all these amazingly crazy, great alum like Jennifer Aniston and Slick Rick and Stephen Bochco. All went to my high school. But I'm off track already. So this book is a book of art writings, which I'm really thrilled about. I'm also writing short stories because my publisher has graced me with a really uncommon thing. They're going to let me do not just another short story collection, which as people in publishing know is kind of a miracle when it happens at all. But I've had sort of 3.5 short story collections in the past, and they stack up. And I'm going to do a new and selected short stories. So I'm really honored by that and motivated to write a couple of new ones this summer that are worthy of going with the best I've done previously.
And where will you set them?
Oh, well, I want there to be something that's exclusive to the book. So the one I'm actually working on right now is kind of a novella that will be only in the book. And then, another form of grace in my life is that the New Yorker likes my short stories. So I have that, legendary first look agreement with them. And then usually when I write a short story, well, I always send it to them first, and it often works out that they'll publish it. So,
Well, let's stand up the good luck for you on that one. And where is this story based? What part of
well, actually, the novella, the one I'm writing now, is going to be a Bay Area. I was just funny. I'm sort of researching on this weekend. I was walking around the Mission, where I used to kind of sort of live in a girlfriend's house. Although I was still based in Berkeley because I worked at Moe's and wanted to live near where I worked. But I had a life in the Mission for a while, and this is going to be a story that doesn't pretend San Francisco doesn't exist. So my character will ride BART on this story, and I was riding BART this morning, and just remembering the feel of certain things because of this story that I'm working on.
Oh, I look forward to reading it. Oh my. It's so exciting to hear about short stories being honored because, as we all know, and you both write in that form, it's not always the form that is chosen as the one to publish. And so many people love the form. I think we ought to have a shout out for the short story. Amy, what are you working on?
First I have to apologize. When you asked us to read from the book, I wasn't thinking that you probably wanted the book that was nominated, that was a finalist.
I want your current book. You did exactly the right thing.
All right,
Yes.
okay. I'm sitting here saying, really?
No, it's okay.
Now,
I just read the reviews of it earlier.
Yeah,
Because your current book and what are you working on next, if you are?
Okay, what I'm working on next is a novel that I started this novel back in the early 2000s, and then I just couldn't get anywhere with it, and I dropped it in 2009, and I know it's 2009 because I was going through my trash pile on my hard disk, and I saw this story, and I started reading it, and I could remember what excited me about it. And then I pulled it out, I started doing more with it, and by then, what happens, I think with anything we write, I mean, maybe Jonathan can confirm or deny, that parts of our lives or whatever is current that we're thinking about, some kind of strife or something important to us somehow enters into the novel. So if it has to do with racism, for example, that's been more overt since 2016, naturally something about that is going to leak in there without being obtrusive or without being startlingly different for the time of the novel, for example. And then what also made me think this was the right novel, I get these little gifts from the unknown where there are coincidences. So the character, one of the main characters, all the circumstances that I wrote about, many of them turned out to be true. And it's so spooky to me that these things, that those parts of the story corroborate with real life. And then something in my life then made it even more true. It's hard, I can't really say what it is that has, when I'm working on a novel, I can't explain what the story is because it feels like I will give away the urge to tell that story. So let me just say that it is a novel. My editor really likes it. It's not a mother and a daughter, and I had, my agent sent a rough draft 100 drafts ago to the New Yorker, and they had wanted to publish it, but they said at 50 pages it's too long. I said, well, it's a novel.
Les Monroe used to.
And they had offered to help cut it for me, and I thought, no, it's too early for me to think about somebody cutting it and putting it in print as though that is the final version, and it's not. And it has changed a lot since then.
Can you also mention We were talking earlier today about conservation and climate change and your involvement in those things, partly because of your birding.
Yeah. This goes along with the fact that when you're writing something and you're really focused and your attention is in a particular direction, you get involved in more of those real aspects in the world. And so when I started looking at birds in 2017, I became aware of how our environment was affecting these birds. There were the wildfires, and suddenly the birds were less, or there were more. There were different species that were coming to the yard and only going to the water bowls and bathing and drinking, and then they would go on. And these were one-offs. They were quite rare for the yard. And I had in real time an understanding of how changes in habitat would affect species. I have since joined the board of the American Bird Conservancy and got to see firsthand what happens to habitat when you restore it, and species that were almost extinct when they come back. So conservation has become very important to me, and I work with 3 conservation groups. On the board of only one, and against my better judgment, I said I will never ever join a board. So I'm hoping I serve my term as, you know, a responsible person, and then I get off the board, but I continue to do things. So.
What have you seen on your patio recently? What birds?
Well, right now there are a lot of fledglings. These young birds that are just learning to fly. So I've seen little oak titmice. They're funny little birds with a crest, very small. And the young ones will be near the parent. The parent is going in to get mealworms. Live mealworms is what we serve at Amy's Bistro. And the babies are standing outside on a little a pole, and they're twirling around and around and beating their wings like this, and they're very excited, and that is part of their behavior when they're waiting to get fed. And then they're like that with their mouth open. So I get to see that, or get to see them learning to fly. The other thing that's on my patio is a nest of nestlings, scrub jays, and we only found it because a piece of paper landed on top of the lime tree, and we pulled out the piece of paper. There was this mother scrub jay sitting on a nest, and I thought they were eggs. And when she took off to do something later to go hunting, I thought, I'll take a picture with my iPhone to see how many eggs are in there. And I stuck my iPhone, between all these thorny branches, and I put it there, and instead of eggs, these heads popped up. Because that's what they do. They have this instinct when there's movement. They're just like that. And I thought, oh my God, I'm so sorry. This will not affect whether parents come back to a bird. That's a myth that if you touch a bird, if you touch their nest, if you do anything, the parents will abandon it. No, that's absolutely not true. So if you find a nestling, for example, that fell out of the nest, put it back. Parents will come. So I'm seeing that. Unfortunately, I'm going back on book tour, so I'm going to miss when they actually fledge. And they're so funny to watch. The little fledglings you see that character of the adult in the young one. Their persistence, their cleverness, their squawkiness, all of it is right there, only in this miniature. Well, they're about the same size as an adult, but in this form that is hilarious. So I'm going to miss that this year.
Cool, thank you. I want to thank Jonathan and Amy. I love reading your work. It's an honor to be here talking to you today. I think there might be some questions from the audience. I wanted to do one last thing. You mentioned you didn't think you were at the ceremony for the NBCC, but you were at the White House recently. You were at the White House?
I was.
You went to the White House. And I wanted to read the citation. Amy Tan, for expanding the American literary canon by bravely exploring experiences of immigrant families, heritage, memories, and poignant struggles. Amy Tan's writing makes sense of the present through the past and makes groundbreaking narrative to the brings groundbreaking narrative to the diverse voices of American life and literature. And birds, I should say. We should add.
Thank you for
You
reading
had-
that. I did remember. I was in a daze.
Shot there.
I was in a daze.
You were there.
I didn't hear anything.
Anyway, it's on the, you can
Okay.
Google it. Do we have questions? Front row, 1, 2.
I have a question for both of you, but I want to start with Amy. I'm just curious about your relationship to your book becoming a movie. Is there anything you want to share? I know it's been a minute, but with the Joy Luck Club.
Oh, Joy Luck Club. This is.
Has
not
there been
a-
other ones? Because you can update us if I've missed out on other ones, but I'd love to
Oh.
know like what that was like for you.
That was another unexpected surprise to me. I was not also, there was interest, but I thought it would die. And I wasn't expecting I would work on the film. A lot of companies would bar authors from being part of this. But I was lured into it just like, we're going to work through what the soul of the book is for the movie. Or why don't you take a chance just try it out. I was an Academy Award winning screenwriter. Just try it and you can see what it takes to earn a scene. Well, that was the emotions of the scene. That was like, heroin to a writer to try and get that kind of information. So I started doing it, and pretty soon I found that I was co-writing it. The movie at the time, we had total creative control, which is something you cannot get, meaning everything from the casting, locations, final edit, even the ads, we had total creative control, final edit. What we didn't have total creative control over was increasing the budget. But everything else, and we wanted that, and I said, if the movie never gets made, if it never makes a box office, that's fine. We made the movie we wanted to make, and everything, this is part of my philosophy in life as a writer, is it has to be worth it in the moment. You cannot do delayed gratification. So, and it was. So the movie was a surprise to me in numerous ways. It was a surprise when the audiences embraced it. And it was a surprise when my mother watched it at the premiere, and she was the only dry-eyed person in the house. I was so afraid she was going to just want to kill herself, and there was a scene of a girl watching her mother kill herself because that had happened to my mother. And she just looked at me, she said, "Oh no, everything in China was so much worse. This is already better." Okay, so that was a surprise. Everything, my life is full of surprises, and I just love that.
And did you have that same question for Jonathan?
Oh, the same.
You had a-
Yeah, right. Well, so Motherless here we go, was adapted, and but it was 20 years after the book was published, and it had been cooking. It was unusual, I think, for such a long delay, because Edward Norton, who had a very clear idea about wanting to star in it, but also wanting to kind of rework the story and be the director and write it, he'd come aboard right away. In fact, it was optioned by New Line Cinema for Edward Norton in galleys before I knew whether the book was going to be embraced by readers, and well before this a good fortune of the award had come my way. So that itself was like a kind of, okay, great. And he and I met way back then in 1999, and he had already got this idea that he was going to kind of conflate my story with his interest in urban development and Robert Moses, and it was a really radical change because it meant moving the plot out of the present. I'd written the book to be set in what was then the present, late 90s, into the very early 1960s to make it a period film. And I kind of loved the liberating quality of this transformation. I was like, well, great, it's just going to be its own thing. And I do generally think films and books, in exceptional cases, they're closer together because of a creative partnership like Amy experienced. But in many, and I think very interesting ways, the most traditional thing is for the book and the film to diverge at some point and become these two uncanny objects that have a relation but are not the same. And that's what I think happened with Motherless Brooklyn. It's its own art object. And I wasn't, my hands aren't on that project in any way except to keep going, okay, sure, great. And then, after a while, they don't even call you to get you to say, okay, all right. They just are doing their thing. And for so long, I thought it wasn't going to happen. It was a project that had a very high profile early on, and then it seemed to go underground, and I thought, well, that's just a lost cause. Because as I bet Amy's experience, other books get optioned, and these developments go nowhere. It's just kind of like a truism that you should not expect anything. Be happy that there's some interest and then go on and do your own thing. So I didn't rate its chances of becoming a film as very high after a while. So then it was, when it finally appeared, it was like, again, one of these magic occurrences where you're like, wait, that happened? Okay, and but I was just like literally someone who showed up at the theater to see what it looked like. I wasn't inside this project.
Did you like it?
I did. I liked it a lot, and I liked the cast was ridiculous. Because he was Edward Norton, and people wanted to act alongside him. He attracted all his friends working for much less than their usual fee, and so it was like crazy with character actors and performances. I went to Telluride and I got to hang out with Willem Dafoe, that was good. That was really good. That was fun.
Oh, wow. You know what? Our time is coming to an end. Do you have a short question? Yep.
What are your favorite places in the Bay Area?
Okay. Favorite places in the Bay Area?
Go first.
I have to say where I live, Sausalito, which is also where my backyard is, and is also part of the headlands where I go hiking.
Well, mine, I love walking around the hills of San Francisco, which I did a lot of yesterday before I took Bart over this morning. But my favorite place in the Bay Area is the long literature shelves at Moe's, which I used to be in charge of for a few years. I was like,
Here's your bookstore, readers, writers, book critics, all of the
thanks
above.
everyone.
Yeah.
This is so fun.
Listen, these guys are going to sign books for you, so if you have other questions, you can raise them when you get their book signatures. And thank you to Green Apple.
Thank you